My next guest is Dr. Teresa Hill. She is a speaker, author, and leader whose work focuses on underserved communities and making the system work for every child. She is devoted to eliminating achievement gaps and ending what she terms failure as a default. Her motto is all children can learn, period. Dr. Hill began her career teaching 31 kindergarten students in Peoria, Illinois, and has served as principal and assistant superintendent as well as superintendent in South Holland, Illinois since 2012. Welcome to the podcast, Teresa.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to join you.
We'll start off with a question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Uh, sure. I will, as I was thinking about this, I flashed back to my time as a kindergarten teacher. I had always loved the idea of teaching kindergarten. I did my student teaching in kindergarten. And when I was hired to be a kindergarten teacher, I was so excited. I was hired on the Friday before school started that year.
Uh-huh.
So a very late hire and had to just kind of hurry up and get ready to go. So
Mhm.
when I showed up at the school, essentially I was given my key to my classroom and shown where my classroom would be, and we were off and running. I started the school year that year with 14 students. The entire school that I was teaching at um, served students that were considered to be low income. So all of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. I started on the first day with 14 students. Um, by the time we were a month into school, I had 31 students,
Wow.
and none of those students had been with me on the first day.
Mhm.
So I later found out that that was because our mobility rate in our school was 114%,
Wow.
which at the time I had never even heard of such a thing. And so I was there, excited about teaching kindergarten, but I had these 31 students in an environment where our parents cared very deeply. We're going to make sure that the students were there and that they knew how important it was to do well in school, but they did not have the time to
Yeah.
be able to come in and be the room mom or any of those kinds of things, as had been the case in some of the other more middle class schools where I had done my pre-teaching
Mhm.
experiences. And so there I was with all of these little students, and just me and all 31 kindergartners. Um, and so the my focus, my goal, my being in the trenches that year was really at the same time I was learning
Yeah.
how to be a teacher at all.
Mhm.
Which, let's face it, you take all the classes you can take and you can student teach, but there's nothing that's like when you are fully responsible for everything that happens in that classroom. And so I had to go through the process of trying to learn how to be a teacher.
Mhm.
At the same time, I had to figure out how to teach all of my babies how to read.
Mhm.
And I had been through, a really good pre-service educator program. But the reality was in teacher education, you're not really taught how to teach someone to read from
Mhm.
scratch. And so thankfully, I was assigned a mentor teacher who
Okay.
was one of their specialists in reading. And so she worked with me to help me begin to teach the students how to read with all of the foundational skills, the phonics skills. Thankfully, I had been taught to read through phonics, so I had some understanding of it, but she really worked with me in planning all of those early lessons and learning how to get that process going. So my in the trenches was really that process of between working with her, looking online, going, and getting random, magazines and
Yeah.
professional articles on how you teach kindergartners to read. I was able through that year to get to a place where I was proficient at teaching reading.
Mhm.
Um, and so I was so excited because I got to the end of the year and my kindergartners were reading. They were sounding out words. I was doing, read alouds with them, and we were doing comprehension and all of those kinds of things that kept them excited. But at the end of that year was one of the first years that our schools were required to take one of the standardized accountability tests.
Okay.
And our school overall really struggled. We had extremely a low level of proficiency when it came particularly to reading.
Mhm.
And those tests had been given starting at third grade and on up as they currently are. And I just remember at that time being so concerned and distraught and having that feeling of um, powerlessness
Mhm.
of the fact that whatever I could do in learning how to become a good reading teacher for my students, I could only do what I could do with them while they were with me in kindergarten.
Mhm.
I had no power or control or influence on what would happen to them when they left me. And
Mhm.
so that was actually the thing that really pushed me to move toward school administration and start working in the areas of curriculum and things like that, because I wanted to be able to have some influence over what happened to the children after they were in my classroom for the
Mhm.
year. How could we make sure that they had what they needed as they moved all the way through elementary school and as they went into their future? And I knew that in the kindergarten classroom, I could make a big difference,
Mhm.
but only for that 1 year. And
Yeah.
then I had to give up that power. So that was really my realization of how can I take what I really want for our kids and expand that beyond what I'm able to do for 1 year.
Mhm. And in the pre-chat, you talked about already starting an administrative program, your first year of teaching. That's a lot to take on as you're learning already how to teach. So,
Mhm.
how many years were you in the classroom before you went into administration?
So I started immediately about halfway through my first year. Once I had that kind of realization, I started through my program. So I finished after my third year of teaching, and then I had the opportunity to apply for an assistant principal role in an elementary school that was very close to where I was living at the time, that served a very similar population of students. So I was able to move into that position and go from being a teacher to an assistant principal after that first 3 years.
Mhm, mhm. And when you worked as an AP and then as a principal at the elementary level, was it, did they have some of the same challenges in terms of literacy scores and what were the main goals at some of those schools in terms of just bringing moving the needle forward, so to speak?
Right. Yeah, much of my career has really been focused on working in schools where there's a high level of need,
Mhm.
where the vast majority of the students are considered to be low income. And
Mhm.
so many of those issues and concerns were very much the same. We were working very hard to make sure that we built our students, of course, their reading skills as the number one issue at the elementary level, but then also to build their math and problem solving skills, their critical thinking skills. So that was something that was a big part of what we needed to do at both of the schools where I ended up serving as an assistant principal. Um, we I was focused in school areas where we served. At the one school, we served the local homeless shelter as well as the public housing in
Mhm.
that local area. And so all of those students came to our schools, and it was our job to make sure that we provided all of those services. Again, these are families that care deeply for their children's success, but we're not going to necessarily be able to, spend 3 hours a night doing, extra tutoring or things like that. So we had to look at what are the ways that we can build in the best possible education into the confines of the time we have them in school.
Mhm. So once you'd been a principal for a number of years, you decided to explore the superintendency. Was that in the same area of Illinois, or was it in a larger district or somewhat kind of similar demographics?
Well, the demographics were similar. So, in the same district where I was principal, I became an assistant
Okay.
superintendent. So, that is what kind of gave me the first entryway into that level of, the district level of leadership.
Mhm.
And I was in that role for about 6 years. And then, so when I started to explore the superintendency, I really was looking at places that served a very similar population. And at that time, we were looking as a family at coming back to the Chicagoland area where I am now. So when I moved into the superintendency, it was in the role that I am in, that I'm still in now in a small I guess technically it's considered a medium-sized elementary school district. So we serve pre-K through eighth grade,
Okay.
actually in the same community to where I grew up.
hmm hmm And how does that inform really your decisions and leadership working now as superintendent in that district you grew up?
I think one of the biggest things that it does for me is it kind of reiterate some of what I have always thought and always wanted. Part of my reason for wanting to go into administration at all was to be able to impact children over time and to make sure that our entire system is being able to provide them with what they need. And so, being back in, working with the same communities in which I grew up, I connect a lot with some of the great opportunities that I was provided going through school districts in the same area. Of course, at the time that I was going through the school district, it was considered to be mostly a kind of middle class population of students, whereas now the majority of our students are considered to be low income. But really connecting to what were the things that were the most meaningful for me and my
Mhm.
friends as we went through school? What are the things that gave us opportunities that we
Mhm.
were then able to use further in life? And how do I make sure that the students now
Mhm.
who may be at a lower income level still have access to all of the wealth of opportunities and experiences that I was able to have as I was going through school? How do we make sure that the children in this area are not limited by their income or by their parents' ability to pay extra fees for extracurriculars or things like that? How do we make sure that those opportunities are available for every child, regardless of what their, home household income is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then you have also written a book, which is entitled The Instructional Leader's Guide to Closing Achievement Gaps, Five Keys for Improving Student Outcomes, which was published by ASCD last year. So how did the book come about? Is it something that you worked with a lot as a principal and assistant superintendent and then decided to write about? How did you get the idea to write the book?
Yes. So my much of the focus of my entire career and all of the work and any publications and presentations and all of the stuff that I've done has really been focused on this idea of closing achievement gaps.
Mhm.
Just recognizing that for many of our children, their access to opportunity can be limited by the experiences that they don't get to have in schools,
Mhm.
that can be limited by struggles with learning how to read and reading well, getting exposed to the math and the problem solving, getting instruction at all in science and social studies in grade levels where those things are not tested. And so um, much of the work that I've done has always been focusing on the achievement gap and looking at, okay, we may be a school that serves children that are from low income environments. That should not necessarily mean that we are not able to give them the skills that they are going to need to be successful and be able to make choices in the future. And
Mhm.
so uh, the book really reflects much of the work that I've done, both in my current district and in previous places where we have worked to look at what is it that we can do within our power
Mhm. Mhm.
as schools to improve outcomes for all of our children? And how do we pinpoint the things that make it more of a struggle for children that are considered to be low income, or for our Black or Brown children, or for our English language learners? How do we make sure that we identify those things and then build into what we do in schools what is necessary to give them the highest level of education that we can? And so that's really where it all came from. And so I decided, after doing some various different presentations and on occasion talking with some of the people from ASCD, to see, okay, how can I put this together? These things that we've identified over time that really make a difference. How do we put this together to be able to share this with other people like myself who really spend their days and nights thinking about how do we improve education for all of our kids? And so that's really where um, this book came from. It's really, how do we pull these things together? What are the most important things that
Mhm.
schools should do if we want to
Yeah.
address this issue?
Mhm. So you also have done research a little bit along the same lines for your doctorate. Tell me a little bit about what that focus was.
Yes. So when I was going through the doctoral program, my focus even then was on the achievement gap and how we begin to address it in schools. One of the things that came up as I looked at the research and the information that was out there that was available was that there was a lot of people talking about the achievement gap, or providing, numbers and quantitative research. Um, but oftentimes the children themselves and their families were left out of the discussion. And so there would be a discussion of, in the case of my dissertation, there would be a discussion of the fact that African American students, were on the losing end of the achievement gap. But I could not find, very much research or articles or anything where somebody actually discussed that issue with actual parents or with students to see what their experiences were, what they knew about it, or what they felt would be helpful. And so, as part of, for my dissertation, I went through the process of identifying and then interviewing
Mhm.
um, African American individuals. In some cases, students themselves who were now, in high school or college. In some cases, parents of younger children going through schools, on their thoughts and ideas related to how schools serve their children, what some of the sources of these achievement gaps were, and what they felt could be done to help support closing the achievement gap. And so that is what turned into my dissertation, was um, all of the insights that I gleaned from all of those individuals that really showed that in many cases, the African American individuals that I spoke with saw the teacher's role and their role as parents or as students differently than what I saw from you know parents and teachers and students in the more middle class, predominantly white school environments that I had worked in previously.
Mhm. Mhm. So what were some of the big ahas that you gleaned from, especially the students? I'd like to hear, as you're interviewing them in high school or college and they're looking back on maybe their formative years in grade school.
I think one of the things that jumped out at me was um, the extent to which they they felt like the relationship between the student and the teacher
Mhm.
um, was much more important.
Mhm.
And the fact that there was a lot of discussion of their views of how a teacher should help students
Mhm.
and what that should look like. Um, what I found was that predominantly the people that I interviewed really valued the idea of the teacher, having a level of strictness and
Mhm.
having a level of high expectations, but also recognizing that there was kind of a sense that um, the education was something that took place between the teacher and the student,
Mhm.
that the parent's role was really to make sure that the student took things seriously
Mhm.
and worked hard and knew that they should behave, but that the actual education and the advancement of the student was really about that relationship between the student and the teacher.
Mhm.
And so that was important because one of the things that I noticed, and had been doing a lot of administrative courses and things like that. There was a lot of talk at that time about teachers being facilitators of learning,
Mhm.
as opposed to being more directors and that kind of thing. And what I found from this group of students was that they struggled with the idea of the teacher being the facilitator of learning.
Mhm.
They viewed that as the teacher not caring as much as they should.
Mhm.
And so, whereas the teacher might be doing that to really try to um, empower the student, in the case of these students, they actually took that in the opposite way. And
Mhm.
so that was something that I thought was, very much an aha moment for me. Just that our different ideas sometimes about the roles that teachers and students should play can impact the outcomes. And everybody can be working hard trying to do what they think is best for kids. But if we never have that discussion and those styles or those roles never match up, then
Mhm.
that can create more of an issue of, the teacher feeling like the child is not taking advantage of the opportunities they're being given, and the child feeling like the teacher is not putting in the work or the care
Mhm.
that they should about their learning.
Mhm. Mhm. And after you did this study and the interviews and found out about these relationship pieces, was there anything that was implemented as a result of your research around teacher-student relationships?
Well, so I ended up actually turning that dissertation
Hmm.
a few years later into my first book.
Okay.
Um, but then really what I did, and then I did do some presentations and some
Hmm.
sharing and definitely some work in my own district at the time of, just really pointing out that there can be those differences in how we view everybody's role, and that when we're working with students from various different backgrounds, but
Hmm.
particularly African American families, that we need to have a discussion of what our roles are going to be. If we, believe in and want to take on the facilitator role, that shouldn't just be expected that everybody knows that. We need to have that discussion with the students at the start of the year, with the parents when we're doing parent teacher conferences of how we're trying to do this and how it's supposed to work. And then we also need to take into account that there may be times when we need to take a more directive role,
Hmm.
especially in areas where students may be struggling or where they may need a little bit more work or assistance, and that we have to have the flexibility to be able to provide that when it's needed. So I was able to really start having those discussions within our school district, where in large part, sometimes the backgrounds of our teachers don't always match the background of our students, and we have to be willing to have that conversation, um, really focusing in on the educational parts of it.
Hmm. Hmm. So you're also presenting a lot with ASCD these days. So um, as this episode comes out, it is near when the ISD ASD conference will take place this summer. What will you be presenting on?
So I'll be presenting more work on how we can lead to close achievement gaps. So my presentation this time really focuses in on how we address issues where there are different levels of needs within the classroom, but maintain a sense of instructional equity within the
Okay.
classroom.
Hmm.
So really focusing in on making sure that just because we have students that may have additional academic needs, that we don't lower the rigor of the curriculum, but instead that we find ways to what I speak about as raising the floor of
Hmm.
how do we make sure that our students that struggle the most can access the real curriculum, and then how do we find ways to expand for those students that are able to do more.
Hmm. Hmm. So I'll be putting a link in the show notes to the session information on the website. You'll also be presenting on a panel. Is that also around the same topic?
So, what we're anticipating that ASCD is going to put together a panel actually
Mhm.
for people like myself
Mhm.
and others who, may have some good ideas to share, that
Mhm.
may actually want to, bring forth their own book and do publishing, and how they can start that process to
Okay.
bring the great things and experiences they have to the forefront for other educators.
Great. Well, we've had a great conversation today around your work that you've written about, both for your dissertation and for your most recent ASD publication, and also just about some of the experiences in the variety of schools and school districts that you've worked in, especially around literacy and bringing up the achievement gap. Out of everything we've talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Um, I think the biggest thing is the importance of focusing on the things that are within our power and our influence as
Mhm.
schools.
Mhm.
We know we deal on a daily basis with things that happen in our children's lives outside of school. We deal with community issues that may come up, and sometimes those kinds of things can crowd out
Mhm.
the great work that we are trying to do, to help our students succeed educationally and academically, and to produce the outcomes. And so I just think it is really important that we as educators take the time to really focus in on what are those things that are within our power
Mhm.
during our time with them in our schools, and how do we build in those things that are going to give our children the opportunities to be successful, and make sure that we push them forward in improving the outcomes that they have. That's where I focused, my book. That's where I have focused my work. And I know right now we're in an even crazier time for all of our schools. I just feel it's really important that with everything else that goes on, we continually bring ourselves back to what is it that we can do within our sphere of influence on a daily basis to make a difference for our children, for their future.
Yeah, it's so important to remember and focus on that piece of what's within your control. So, where can people connect with you and find you online?
So I am quite active on LinkedIn at
Mhm.
TD Hill EDD. And that is pretty much my handle everywhere you can find me. So I am on Twitter or X, and I am on Instagram
Mhm.
at TD Hill EDD. I also just recently launched a website, which is again tdhilledd.org.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was a pleasure hearing about your work, and looking forward to seeing you at the ASCD ISD conference this summer.
Absolutely.